Hello, I'm going to be reading another chapter of Church History in Plain Language by Bruce Shelley, and I'm going to be starting chapter 9. Countries of the Sunrise, Early Christianity in Asia and Africa. As Jesuit missionaries in the 1620s excavated the grounds of the ancient temple of Xianfu, a grand capital of the Tang dynasty, at the farthest reach of the Silk Road in north-central China, they made an astonishing discovery. Christians had been there nearly 1,000 years before. The clerics labored to unearth an enormous stone monument known as the Xianfu Stele, or sometimes as Nestorian Stele, buried under centuries of soil and history, buried so deeply that the story recounted by the stone's inscription was almost unbelievable. While the churches of the West had long exposed that there had been no Christian presence in China until the Jesuit expedition of the 1500s, there was evidence to the contrary. In reality, the monument testified Syriac-speaking Christians had arrived in China via the Silk Road in 1635. And with that, commonly held beliefs about the history of Christianity in China and of Christianity in Asia had to be reconsidered. As it turned out, these Jesuit pioneers were not exploring uncharted territory. They were standing at ground zero of what had once been a vibrant network of Christian churches and monasteries. In some ways, this story is an apt metaphor for considering the history of Christianity in Asia and Africa generally, especially as the faith is growing at an astronomical rate in the non-Western world today. Like those Jesuit missionaries, we are not discovering Christianity in these places. We are rediscovering it. Christianity began as a non-Western religion, and it has become a non-Western religion once again. The faith is returning to its roots. Profiles of faith. This is like a little subsection. Alopen. If anybody can see this, they can decide the pronunciation themselves. Alopen 600 brought Christianity to China. His group of Syriac-speaking missionaries from Persia arrived in China in 635. Not much is known about him, but the Nestorian Stele, an artifact written in both Chinese and Syriac, is dated to 1781 and dating to 1781 identifies Alopen by name. Arriving during the foreigner-friendly Tang dynasty, Alopen's mission established a Christian presence in China that lasted more than 200 years and included monasteries all over the country. In fact, the Nestorian Stele was unearthed at the site of an ancient Christian monastery. Now we're at another section, the Third Christian World. We are accustomed to thinking of Christianity as a movement that migrated from its Palestinian homeland to North Africa and Europe before being exported to the Western Hemisphere in the 15th century. However, we need to learn to think of Christianity as a tricontinental religion, encompassing Asia as well as Africa and Europe from its earliest days. In as late as the 11th century, at least 1/3 of the world's Christians lived in Asia, and perhaps as much as 10% of global Christians lived in Africa. These churches were known to early Christians in the Latin-speaking West. In his ecclesiastical history, written sometime in the early 4th century, Eusebius of Caesarea makes casual reference to Christian communities in Armenia, Ethiopia, and India, for example, as if their existence was common knowledge. So why is this third Christian world of the early church so little known today? To answer this question, we must go back to the Council of Chalcedon, convened in 1451. The so-called Chalcedonian statement was established by the Hypostatic Union. as the authoritative formulation of the relationship between Jesus' divine and human nature, settled the issue for the imperial churches of Rome and Constantinople, but not everyone agreed. Various Christian movements, namely the Syriac-speaking Nestorian Church of the Persian Empire, which considered itself simply the Church of the East, and the Coptic-speaking Miaphysite churches of Egypt, broke communion with both Rome and Constantinople over fine doctrinal points of Christology. In time, these non-Chalcedonian expressions of Christianity exploded eastward and southward. Nestorian missionaries set out from eastern Syria along the Silk Road, while Miaphysites established links with Christian communities along the Nile. As a result, in some Western church histories, these Nestorians and Miaphysites are mentioned only as heretics outlawed by Chalcedon, if they are mentioned at all. However, as historian Philip Jenkins has written, a reader would not go far wrong by understanding both terms and meanings. Simply ancient Christian denominations mainly active outside Europe. I feel like I need to read that sentence again. A reader would not go far wrong by understanding both terms as meaning simply ancient Christian denominations mainly active outside Europe. Setting certain doctrinal questions aside, Christianity's roots in Asia and Africa are much deeper and older than in Europe. Almost without exception, these Asian and African churches from Syria and Armenia to Egypt and Ethiopia can trace their lineage to credible traditions linking them with the apostles. By comparison, much of Europe was late to the game. For example, Poland became a Christian domain in 1966. The Kingdom of Kievan Rus, which for a time held most of Eastern Europe, adopted the Orthodox faith in 988. The Scandinavian Kingdom of Norway and Sweden were still in the process of conversion to Christianity around the early thousands. When Augustine of Canterbury sailed for England in 595, there were already thriving churches in India. So while it is true that Europe eventually did become the center of world Christianity, this occurred when the faith was already in its 25th or 30th generation in parts of Asia and Africa. At its height, the Church of the East was a vast network of churches and monasteries stretching from Syria to India to China. Like its Roman counterpart, the Church of the East grew exponentially even in the face of intense persecution at the hands of Zoroastrians of Central Asia and within even greater geographical reach. For instance, there is record of a Nestorian bishop in lands as diverse as modern-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and even further in places like Tangat and Tibet, Patna on the banks of the Ganges in India, and Kambalik, the ancient Chinese capital now known as Beijing. Scholars have even discovered trace evidence to suggest that Nestorian missionaries ventured as far as Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand, the Philippines, Java, Sumatra, Korea, and Japan. There are also remnants of Syriac-speaking Christian communities on the remote island of Socotra in the middle of the Arabian Sea. Presiding over these far-flung outposts from his seats in the Mesopotamian city of Seleucia, near what is now Baghdad, Iraq, was the Catholicos, the Patriarch of the Church of the East. The most prominent of these patriarchs was Timothy I, who held the position from 780 to 823. Though his name is known to many Christians in the West, Timothy was perhaps the most important Christian leader of the early Middle Ages because of the enormous geographical scope because of the enormous geographical scope of the church in the East. Timothy oversaw as much as 1/4 of the world's Christians, rivaled only by the Patriarch of Constantinople, and eclipsed by the Pope in Rome, of whom Timothy appears to have heard, but in whom he was not particularly interested. To appreciate the scale of his domain, consider that by the early 9th century, England had 2 Catholic bishops, one in York and one in Canterbury. At the same point in history, Timothy presided over 19 metropolitan and 85 bishops, including a bishop in the rugged mountain of Tibet. The extent and influence of the Church of the East is revealed in the context of a rather mundane dispute about a technical liturgical question. To settle the debate, Timothy appealed to the established practices of the Church in the East. The countries of the sunrise, that is to say, the Indians, the Chinese, the Tibetans, the Turks. When Timothy died in 823, he had every reason to believe that the future of Christianity lay not in Europe, but in the countries of the sunrise. And had it not been for the rapid expansion of Islam through Central Asia across the 7th and 8th centuries, he likely would have been right. Western Christians have forgotten, writes Diarmaid MacCulloch, that before the coming of Islam utterly transformed the situation in the Eastern Mediterranean and Asia, there was a good chance that the center of the gravity of Christian faith might have moved east to Iraq rather than west to Rome. Nevertheless, up until the 14th century, Christianity enjoyed something of a golden age throughout Asia and Africa, a period marked by intellectual vibrancy and industrious missionary activity. It's a story full of unfamiliar names and places, and that's why it's a story worth telling. So now we're at a little section called Along the Silk Road, Christian Missions to Asia. It was in the Syrian city of Antioch that the followers of the crucified and risen Jesus of Nazareth were first called Christians. That's Acts 11:26. And within 3 centuries, Syria emerged as a bustling center of theological training and missionary activities. Syria was a combustible place, constantly tugged and pulled by the imperialistic ventures of both the Romans and the Persians. Yet in some ways, this was advantageous for early Christians, as Syria became a hub of cultures, ideas, and religions, including Islam and Zoroastrianism. Antioch itself was the westernmost top of the Silk Road, which Syriac-speaking missionaries traveled to bring the faith first to India and then to China. Although its exact origins are unclear, there was likely a Christian presence beyond Antioch within a generation of the death of Jesus, as the cities of Edessa and Nisibis in northeast Syria grew into their engines of Christian mission. Sorry, I'm like losing my place here. Although its exact origins are unclear, there was likely a Christian presence beyond Antioch within a generation of the death of Jesus, as the cities of Edessa and Nisibis in northeast Syria grew into the engines of Christian mission to the Persian Empire. According to Eusebius, that's spelled like Eusebius. According to Eusebius in his ecclesiastical history, a terrible illness had stumped the court physicians of King Akbar, ruler of Mesopotamia, who was close to death. As the tradition goes, in his desperation, Abgar wrote a letter to Jesus pleading with him to come to his capital of Edessa. Although Jesus did not personally attend to Abgar, he promised to send one of his disciples to heal him. Eusebius records that the apostle Thomas commissioned Thaddeus for the job. When he came to these places, Eusebius writes, he both healed Abgar by the word of Christ and astonished all there with the extraordinary miracles he performed. Once established, Christianity grew rapidly in Syria despite sporadic yet severe persecution. The first martyrdoms in Edessa began as early as 112. On one grisly Good Friday in 344, 100 priests were beheaded in front of their bishop, who was then executed himself. Under the Sassanid dynasty, which held power from the 3rd century to the 7th. Tens of thousands of Syrian Christians were put to death. In spite of all this, the Church of the East proved remarkably resilient, establishing a revolutionary missionary academy at Nisibis, which had perhaps as many as 1,000 students at its height. Here, missionaries were trained in theology and medicine before setting off to the east. Between 450 to 500 Nestorian missionaries poured out of Nisibis, reaching many nomadic peoples of Central Asia. Everywhere they went, they built schools, libraries, and hospitals. In addition, Syria produced a series of revered, if controversial, theologians, some of whom were read widely in the West, including Ignatius of Antioch, that's 35 to 108, Tatian the Syrian, 112 to 180, Ephraim the Syrian, that's 306 to 373, and Theodore of Mopsuestia. I'm going to pretend that's how you say it. 350 to 429 AD. Farther to the northeast, Christians were finding their way across formidable mountain ranges and down into the hermit kingdom of Armenia, which has a claim to being the very first state to adopt Christianity as the official religion of the realm. Under Tigranes the Great, that's 95 to 55 BC, the Armenian Empire had once stretched from the Caspian Sea to the Mediterranean, but by the Christian era, Armenia had become a small but independent state situated between the Romans and the Persians, isolated by its severe topography. I'm saying that wrong, but you know what I mean. Despite this geographical seclusion, Eusebius mentions Christians living in Armenia in the early 4th century, although he leaves the precise origins of these communities unclear. There are several accounts. According to legend, the disciple Thaddeus arrived in Armenia in 43, where he was joined by Bartholomew in 60. Both apostles are said to have died there as martyrs. Alternatively, we know that Syriac missionaries from Edessa reached Armenia by the 3rd century. The traditional account, however, honors Gregory the Illuminator from 257 to 333 as the founder of Christianity in Armenia. Gregory was himself an Armenian, a Parthian prince who was educated as a Christian in Caesarea in Cappadocia, present-day Turkey. Upon his return, he found himself, like Daniel in Babylon, imprisoned in a pit by the monarch Tiridates III, who reigned from 287 to 330, for refusing to participate in pagan sacrifices. As the story goes, Gregory was recalled from his pit after 12 years to cure Tiridates, who had descended into a mysterious state of madness. After this miraculous healing, Tiridates, it's Tiridates, which probably isn't that hard to actually say, but I'm not sure how to say it. Okay, upon his return, he found himself, like Daniel, in Babylon, imprisoned in a pit by the monarch Tiridates III, who reigned from 287 to 330, for refusing to participate in pagan sacrifices. As the story goes, Gregory was recalled from his pit after 12 years to cure Tiridates, who descended into a mysterious state of madness. After his miraculous healing, Tiridates and his royal court converted to Christianity and received baptism from Gregory, probably in about the year 300. That same year, Armenia adopted Christianity as its imperial religion, making it the first Christian kingdom some 13 years before Emperor Constantine and Licinius legalized the Christian faith throughout the Roman Empire with the Edict of Milan. Subsequently, the Armenian Orthodox Church developed its own unique character as an independent, non-Chalcedonian body, officially splitting from Rome and Constantinople at the Council of Divine in 506. In time, the church became the custodian of Armenian language and culture. with the brilliant monk Mesrop Mashtats from 362 to 440, a scholar versed in Greek, Syriac, and Persian, producing a written alphabet and translating the scriptures into Armenian. Despite Islamic conquests into Armenia in the 7th century, the Armenian Orthodox Church still endured as one of the most ancient Christian institutions in the world. Around the same time, Christianity was beginning to take root in the kingdom of Iberia, now known as Georgia, Armenia's northern neighbor, thanks in large part to a faithful old woman. In his church history, composed about the year 400, the monk Rufinus of Aquileia recounts the remarkable tale of the enlightener of Georgia, who came to be known as Saint Nino. Before she was Saint Nino, however, she was simply Nino, a migrant to Georgia, possibly brought there as a slave, with a reputation for extraordinary piety and spiritual power. After hearing a rumor that Nino had healed a sick child by praying to the God of the Christians, Nana, queen of Iberia and wife of King Mirian III, requested an audience with Nino. Nana herself was in the throes of a deadly illness when Nino cured it by the same miraculous means. When the reports reached Mirian, the king was skeptical. He continued to worship the pagan gods for some time until he lost his way in the wilderness on a hunting trip and was delivered by calling on the name of Christ. Whatever details may be legendary, we do know that Mirian was baptized as a Christian in 337, and he petitioned Constantinople to appoint a bishop for Mtskheta. That's spelled like Mtschheta, his capital city. But even before Mirian's conversion, the region was represented by 2 bishops at the Council of Nicaea, indicating a substantial Christian presence in Georgia by the early 4th century. As an Armenian Christian scholar produced a written alphabet, and Christianity has defined Georgian culture since. Although the Georgian Orthodox Church maintains a communion with both the Roman Catholic Church and Greek Orthodox Church, it remains an independent ecclesial body. While figures like Gregory and Nino were working near the Caspian Sea, East Syrian missionaries were arriving in India. However, it's plausible that faith had already been there for generations by that time. According to the dominant church tradition, the Apostle Thomas first brought the gospel to India, although there is another ancient tradition linking the Christianization of India to Bartholomew. Whatever the case, the oldest Christian communities in India refer to themselves as Thomas Christians, which lends credence to the notion that Thomas reached Kerala in 52 before suffering martyrdom in Chennai some 20 years later. Thomas's work is recorded in the Acts of Thomas, a Gnostic text written in Syriac dating to the 3rd or 4th century, which states that the disciples drew lots to determine their respective assignments. In fulfilling the Great Commission, India fell to Thomas, who, like the prophet Noah, only reluctantly made his way after being commanded by the risen Jesus in a dream. In India, a certain king, Gandhar, who reigned from 19 to 46, furnished Thomas with money to build a royal palace. Instead, Thomas used the funds to serve the poor. Outraged at first, Gandhar came around to Christianity after Thomas had said to have shown him a copy of his ornate palace in heaven. That's ridiculous. Although there is some question as to the historical reliability of the Acts of Thomas, it is by no means outlandish to suppose that Christian missionaries could have traversed the well-established trade routes between Palestine and India. After all, there were Roman trading outposts in India within the 1st century, and it is possible that Christianity first came to India by way of Greek-speaking Christians from Roman Egypt. Even if Thomas never made it to India, it wouldn't be long before East Syrian missionaries did. Indeed, India had become a hotbed of Christian activity by the end of the 3rd century, under the jurisdiction of the Syriac-speaking Church of the East. Eusebius tells of the journey of the philosopher Pantanius of Alexandria, who died somewhere around the year 200. Full of zeal, Pantanius undertook to evangelize India, only to find, once he had got there, Christians reading the Gospel of Matthew in Hebrew and claiming to have been Christianized by the Apostle Bartholomew generations before. Similarly, when David of Basra, a metropolitan of the Church of the East, visited India roughly a century later, he found churches everywhere. Likewise, writing in 550, a traveler named Cosmas reported that even in Tapropane, modern-day Sri Lanka, an island in further India, where the Indian Sea is, there is a church of Christians with clergy and a body of believers. As late as 1420, an Italian visitor scribbled in his journal that these Nestorians are scattered all over India, in like matter as are the Jews among us. By the end of the 5th century, these Thomas Christians were officially aligned not with Rome or Constantinople, but with the Church of the East. Syriac-speaking missionaries pushed even further toward the sunrise, reaching China via the Silk Road, perhaps as early as 450. The earliest actual record of Christian activity in China, however, dates to 635, when Catholicos Yashuyab II, from 628 to 644, commissioned a Persian bishop, Alopin, to lead a contingent of scholars and monks into the court of the foreigner-friendly Emperor Taizong of the Tang dynasty. Not much is known of Alopin, but the Xianfu Stele, an artifact written in both Chinese and Syriac and dating to 781, identifies him by name as the one who first brought the luminous religion to China. As the stele attests, Alopin and his colleagues laid the groundwork for a thriving Christian presence under the House of Tang, complete with an entire hierarchy of priests and deacons. In 638, these missionaries founded their first monastery. Soon they were building monasteries all over China, in at least 10 provinces, some of which endured into the 11th century. By the end of the 18th century, the Church of China had its very own bishop, Adam, who erected the Xianfu Stela. In the centuries to follow, Christian fortunes in China waxed and waned. Eventually, the openness that characterized Taizong's reign gave way to intense religious persecution under the Taoist Emperor Wuzong, who reigned from 840 to 846. Wuzong proved hostile towards foreign ideas, and he targeted both Buddhists and Christians. As a result, we have little record of Christian activity in China between the 10th and 13th centuries, but the faith never disappeared. For instance, Patriarch Sebarisune III appointed a bishop for the northern city of Cathay in 1095. There was also a Christian presence in the court of the Mongol ruler Kublai Khan, who reigned from 1260 to 1294, founder of China's Yuan dynasty. Kublai Khan is said to have petitioned the Roman Pope for 100 missionaries. 30 years later, a few did make their way to China, but by then it was too late. Christianity soon was all but extinguished, along with all foreign creeds, with the rise of the Ming dynasty in the mid-14th century. Okay, now we're at another section called Christianity Along the Nile. While Nestorians ventured east, Miaphysite Christianity mushroomed across Africa, spreading west along the northern coast from the city of Alexandria to Rome to Egypt. Spreading west along the northern coast of the city of Alexandria and Roman Egypt to south along the Nile to the ancient kingdoms of Ethiopia and Nubia, today's northern Egypt and Sudan. Alexandria became in many ways the epicenter of African Christianity, and the faith appears to have arrived there before the close of the 1st century. For instance, the book of Acts notes that Paul's co-worker Apollos within a thorough knowledge of the scriptures and instructed the way of the Lord, was a native of Alexandria. According to Eusebius' ecclesiastical history, it was none other than the evangelist Mark, author of the second gospel, who first established churches in Alexandria. Now we have a profiles of faith section. Frumentius, a sailor originally from the city of Tyre in Phoenicia, was shipwrecked off the Horn of Africa and captured by Ethiopians around 340. He became a civil servant in the king's court, eventually converting the king to Christianity and serving as a personal tutor of the crown prince Ezana. When Ezana became king, he made Christianity the official religion of Aksum, the capital. Frumentius traveled to Alexandria, Egypt, in about 347 and was consecrated as the first bishop of Aksum by Athenaeus, establishing a link between Egyptian, Coptic, and Ethiopian churches that still endures. Frumentius is considered the founding saint of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which maintained its identity and integrity even after Islam dominated the region from the 7th century on. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church continues to be the largest Christian denomination in Ethiopia today. In the centuries to follow, Alexandria grew into an intellectual center, producing a substantial library of New Testament manuscripts as well as some of the finest minds of the patristic era, such as theologians Clement from 150 to 215, Origen 885 to 254, Athanasius 296 to 373, and Cyril 378 to 444. All of these figures thought and wrote in Greek, but North Africa was also home to the premier Latin writers of the early church, including Tertullian from 160 to 220, Cyprian from 200 to 258, and Augustine from 354 to 430. All of whom were situated in Roman Carthage, modern-day Algeria, and Tunisia. Early monasticism also took shape in the severe desert south of Alexandria, where monks such as Anthony the Great from 251 to 356 devoted their lives to solitary prayer. That guy lived a long time. Before long, the Coptic Church Before long, the Coptic Church, an indigenous independent expression of Christianity, aligned with neither Rome nor Constantinople and named after the dominant language in Egypt, established links with their neighbors to the south, Ethiopia and Nubia. Eusebius writes that Christianity came to Ethiopia through the testimony of the Ethiopian Church, the first of the Gentiles that received the mysteries of the divine word from Philip. That's Acts 8:26 to 40. But Ethiopia probably owes its lasting Christian heritage to a shipwreck. In the early 4th century, a contingent of Phoenician Christians who had been educated in Alexandria were trying to make their way to India when they were waylaid in the port city of Adulis off of the Horn of Africa. Local inhabitants killed everyone aboard the ship, sparing only 2 young boys, one of them Frumentius, who became the first bishop of Aksum, the capital of the Ethiopian Empire, by decade's end. Although no one could have guessed it then, Frumentius and his brother Adesius were kidnapped by the Ethiopians and made servants in the court of the king Aksum. Frumentius as a teacher and Adesius as a royal cupbearer. When the king died, Adesius elected to return home to Tyre, but the queen urged Frumentius to remain in Ethiopia as the personal tutor to the crown prince Ezana, who reigned as the emperor of Aksum from 320 until 356. Under Frumentius' influence, Ezana eventually converted to Christianity and later made it the official religion of the kingdom by imperial decree. In time, Ethiopia blossomed into a thriving Christian civilization. Organized by monasticism, emerged around 480, and monks quickly began the work of evangelism across the Aksumite Empire even reaching beyond the Red Sea into Arabia and Yemen. The exploits of the so-called Nine Saints are particularly noteworthy. These missionaries carried the Christian faith into the Ethiopian heartland and effectively eliminating paganism throughout the realm. By the middle of the 6th century, the scriptures had been translated into the local language of Ge'ez, and an impressive library of Christian literature was collected. When Europeans eventually made their way to East Africa, they were astonished at what they found. A Portuguese travel log from the 16th century puts it vividly. No country in the world is so full of churches, monasteries, and ecclesiastics as Abyssinia, that is Ethiopia. It is not possible to sing in one church without being heard by another and perhaps by several. Over the last 1,600 years, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, which maintained its independence even as Islam dominated a region in the 7th and 8th centuries, has become central to the Ethiopian identity. Ethiopian Christianity still has a distinctly Semitic character, holding to several Jewish observations: Saturday Sabbath, abstinence from unclean food, and the circumcision of male infants. According to the 13th century epic Kebra Nagast, The Glory of Kings, the first Ethiopian emperor Menelik I, said to be the son of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, secretly moved the Ark of the Covenant from Jerusalem to Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still claims to possess the Ark. Today, Ethiopia can rightly claim to be among the oldest continuously Christian civilizations, whereas its northerly neighbors, Egypt and Nubia, eventually succumbed to Muslim conquest. Ethiopia withstood the rapid expansion of Islam, tracing its lineage through Frumentius to Athanasius to Ethiopia to the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. I read that wrong. Tracing its lineage through Frumentius to Athanasius, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church is still united with the substantially diminished Coptic Church of Egypt and stands as the most vibrant example of indigenous African Christianity. And there's a Northeast Africa and Arabia map, which I might just show more clearly by editing this. The story of Christianity in Nubia is no less fascinating. There may have been a Christian presence in Nubia as early as the 3rd century, but the first official record dates to the joint reign of the Byzantine emperors Justinian I, who reigned from 527 to 565, and his wife Theodora, who reigned from 527 to 48, each of whom appointed their own respective mission to Nubia. Here we have a dramatic bit of palace intrigue. Justinian accepted the Chalcedonian statement, but Theodora did not. After sending her own Miaphysite contingent to Nubia, led by an Alexandrian presbyter named Julian, Theodora shrewdly arranged for her husband's Chalcedonian company to be detained in Egypt. By the time Justinian's crew could free itself, it was too late. Theodora's convoy had reached Nubia around the year 543, and its king Silko had already converted to Miaphysite Christianity. Thereafter, Nubia flourished as a Christian civilization, reaching its zenith in the 10th century before succumbing to Islamic conquest in the 15th century, when Arabic replaced Nubian in the language of the realm. Nevertheless, the legacy of Nubian Christianity lives on. In the 1960s, archaeologists unearthed a spectacular cathedral in Faras, which featured ornate frescoes depicting bishops and saints styled in Nubian dress and with dark skin, exemplifying the profound relationship between Christian faith and the Nubian culture. Lost Worlds. As Christianity was entering its golden age in Africa and Asia, a period of industrious missionary expansion and intellectual innovation, a new power was rising in the barren deserts of the Arabian Peninsula. In 610, a little-known Arab merchant retreated into the mountains for secluded prayer, and he emerged as the Prophet Muhammad. Bummer for everyone. The bear it was said, of direct revelations from the one true God. Within 200 years, the faith known as Islam had exploded from its humble origins in Mecca to throughout the known world. Lands that had for centuries been Christian, Syria, Palestine, North Africa, Persia, now found themselves under Islamic rule. The Muslim forces had reached as far as Spain in the west and China in the east by the close of the 8th century. Today, we are accustomed to thinking of Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran as Islamic states. But as we have seen, this wasn't always so. Nonetheless, by the end of the 14th century, Christianity had been driven to the brink of destruction in many places where it had once been the dominant faith, replaced by Islam. Consequently, it has not been uncommon for scholars and historians to speak of Christianity's extinction in these parts of the world, but perhaps a better word would be dormancy. A remnant of the faith has always survived, even in the direst of circumstances, lying dormant, waiting for a new birth. And indeed, if the growth of the church in places like China or Uganda, to name only 2 examples, is any indication, it appears that in the 21st century, Christianity is awakening once again in the countries of the sunrise. And that concludes this chapter.